The First World War is remembered for noise. Artillery thundered for days without pause. Machine guns tore the air into fragments. Explosions shook cities miles from the front. The sky itself seemed to scream. Yet beneath this violence existed another, equally powerful force: silence. Not the absence of sound, but a deliberate, oppressive, and sometimes terrifying quiet that shaped the war as profoundly as any weapon. Silence governed trenches, hospitals, occupied towns, ships at sea, prison camps, homes waiting for news, and the minds of those who survived. It was enforced, chosen, endured, and inherited. It dictated survival, concealed fear, and followed soldiers long after the guns stopped. This is the story of the Great War's quiet dimension, the war that unfolded when the noise faded and the silence took command. Before the first shots were fired, silence already had a role. Mobilization did not begin with explosions, but with sealed envelopes, whispered conversations, and unreadable expressions. Orders arrived quietly. Men packed without ceremony. Mothers folded shirts in still rooms. Fathers stood at doorways longer than usual. The absence of sound during those final moments before departure carried a weight that words would have diluted. Railway stations were loud places, but between departures, there were pockets of stillness, moments when crowds paused, eyes met, and everyone understood that something irreversible was happening. The silence in those moments was collective. It was a shared intake of breath before the world fractured. Once the war settled into trenches, silence became tactical. Soldiers learned that quiet was safety. A careless sound could draw sniper fire, artillery retaliation, or a sudden raid. Boots were wrapped in cloth. Tools were handled slowly. Metal was padded. Even coughing was stifled, even pain swallowed, because noise invited death. At night, silence deepened. The battlefield transformed into a tense void where every sound mattered. The scrape of wire, the splash of mud, the clink of equipment, each could betray a position. Men lay awake listening, straining to separate imagination from reality. Silence did not bring rest. It sharpened fear. In that stillness, the mind filled the gaps with memories, worries, and the anticipation of violence yet to come. Silence was also weaponized. Raids were launched without warning. Patrols moved like shadows. Mines were dug silently beneath enemy positions, sometimes for months, with soldiers listening through stethoscopes pressed to the earth, trying to detect the faintest vibration of enemy tunneling. Underground, the war was fought almost entirely in silence. Breath held, tools muffled, fear amplified by darkness and confinement. When explosions finally came, they shattered silence so completely that survivors remembered the quiet before them more vividly than the blast itself. Silence became the edge of terror, the moment when the body knew something terrible was about to happen, but could not yet react. In hospitals, silence took on another meaning. Wards filled with wounded men often fell quiet, not because there was no pain, but because pain had exhausted expression. Nurses moved softly. Orderlies spoke in low voices. Machines had not yet replaced human observation, so doctors learned to read the smallest signs: shallow breathing, slight movements, the absence of sound where there should have been one. Silence marked death, a bed that no longer rustled, a breath that did not return, the absence of coughing, groaning, or whispered prayers. In overcrowded hospitals, silence was sometimes the only signal that a life had ended. Yet hospitals also used silence to heal. Loud noises triggered panic in shell-shocked patients. Calm environments were carefully maintained. Curtains were drawn. Footsteps softened. Silence became medicine. Imperfect, fragile, but necessary. On the home front, silence ruled daily life in a different way. Families waited for letters that did not arrive. The mailbox remained empty. Days passed without news. This silence was unbearable because it had no shape. It could mean safety or disaster. It stretched endlessly, offering no resolution. Governments understood the power of silence and enforced it through censorship. Newspapers left blank spaces where information had been removed. Letters arrived with entire paragraphs blacked out. Words were stripped away until meaning became ambiguous. Silence was used to control morale, to hide losses, to delay grief. People learned to read silence as carefully as they read headlines. A delayed letter, a neutral tone, a lack of detail. These absences spoke loudly to those trained by anxiety to notice them. In occupied territories, silence was survival. Civilians learned to speak less, listen more, and reveal nothing. Conversations were guarded. Even familiar faces could not be trusted. Silence protected resistance networks and concealed compassion. A wrong word could lead to arrest, deportation, or execution. Children learned this silence early. They were taught not to repeat what adults said, not to ask questions in public, not to speak when soldiers passed. Silence became a language passed down instinctively, shaping a generation's understanding of fear and restraint. At sea, silence took on a mechanical form. Submarines operated beneath the surface, where sound traveled differently. Crews learned to move quietly, to shut down engines, to listen for enemy propellers through metal hulls. Silence determined whether a vessel lived or died. Entire ships vanished without noise, leaving behind only unanswered questions. In the air, silence was rare, but ominous. Aircraft engines could be heard from miles away, yet moments of quiet flight created a surreal detachment. Pilots remembered gliding above battlefields where explosions were visible but not audible, as if the war below existed in another world. Silence separated heaven and hell by altitude alone. When the armistice came, silence returned abruptly. Guns stopped. Shelling ceased. The absence of sound was so sudden it felt unreal. Many soldiers did not celebrate immediately. They waited, listening, suspicious of the quiet. After years of constant noise, silence felt dangerous, like the pause before another attack. In the weeks that followed, silence spread unevenly. Battlefields fell quiet, but hospitals did not. Homes filled with unspoken grief. Veterans returned unable to explain what they had experienced. Language failed. Silence replaced stories because words could not carry the weight of memory. This post-war silence became one of the most enduring legacies of the conflict. Many veterans never spoke of the war again. Families learned not to ask. Nations erected monuments that honored sacrifice without describing it. Silence became a social agreement, a way to coexist with trauma without reopening wounds. Yet silence was never empty. It was filled with images, sensations, and moments that resurfaced in dreams and reflections. It shaped art, literature, and politics. It haunted anniversaries and shaped future conflicts. The world moved forward, but the quiet remained, layered beneath progress like sediment. Over time, historians began to listen to this silence. Diaries, letters, marginal notes, and gaps in records revealed as much as official reports. Silence itself became evidence, proof of fear, censorship, loss, and resilience. The First World War taught humanity that sound does not define violence alone. Silence can wound just as deeply. It can isolate, protect, conceal, and preserve. It can enforce obedience or allow survival. It can mark endings and prevent beginnings. Even today, when one stands on former battlefields at dawn, the silence feels deliberate, almost respectful. Wind moves through grass. Birds return. The earth holds its breath. The quiet is not emptiness, it is memory. Layered and patient. The Great War roared, but it was silence that followed humanity home.